I'm pretty sure that everyone that exists and is alive today is at least somewhat aware of what South Park is. Very bare minimum stuff, they at least know the name in passing. And for anyone that doesn't know it in any more detail than that, it's an adult cartoon like Family Guy or The Simpsons that follows 4 kids who are best friends, I put in quotations, as they have misadventures around their small town and get into wacky hijinks, as kids usually do in cartoons. It's mainly a comedy show, it's very politically insensitive, it only ever has continuity when it feels like it, you know the drill. All this being said, it is not that deep. But when has that ever stopped me from making super convoluted and complicated rewrites of things that aren't meant to be taken seriously? The answer is never. So welcome to South Park the Reboot, where the boys are actually friends, and it gets really sad for no reason. Today I'm just gonna give a brief overview of the biggest changes that I've made for this, to the story overall, and then I'll talk about the characters individually, at least the 4 main ones. The first probably really small change is that it is now canon that it snows pretty much every day of the year, like it's perpetually winter. In the original South Park, I literally think that's just a matter of being lazy with continuity and stuff. But I'm kinda okay with that, because it's one of the few shows that actually takes place perpetually in a really cold climate. I haven't fully decided if I'm gonna make South Park itself as a town in Canada instead of the USA. I can already hear all the South Park fans rolling in their graves. Yeah, I thought I'd have it set in Canada just because Canada is by and large colder than the USA, and also because, once again, original South Park fans and anyone who watches the show in general, I just think it would be hilarious. But the actual reason it's cold all the time isn't actually about where it takes place. South Park is cold all the time because it's weird. And it's weird in the way that it has monsters, magic, mayhem, aliens, all the supernatural spooky shit. The main plot of this story is that we follow these 4 idiots who are basically shitty supernatural investigators. Not even investigators, they're just kind of the town's resident idiots that go around dealing with all the supernatural shit whenever it comes for fun. They're like a wannabe Scooby-Doo gang that goes into the haunted mansions with flashlights and shit looking for ghosts. Only with much more swearing and the ghosts are real. Besides that, I also aged them up to be teenagers. The reason being because I want to explore mature themes in this story, and even if I still want them to be kids, it's better to explore mature themes with teenagers than it is with 8-year-old children. With that out of the way, let's take a looky at Stan. These characters have all changed quite a lot, in my opinion. I don't know which one I would call the most changed, but I think Stan is pretty high up there. I started with giving him actual personality traits first, because, if my admittedly limited knowledge and viewing of South Park has taught me anything, it's that Stan falls pretty heavily into the category of boring protagonist. It's basically when there's a main character and they're surrounded by a bunch of really cool and interesting different characters that are part of the main group, but they themselves are pretty bland and boring. In the original series, Stan's only character traits are that he is in love with Wendy, that he throws up, and that he is experiencing problems with alcoholism. Which are cool character traits, but they're the only character traits. Besides that, Stan's whole purpose is to just be the normal one. So here I want to give him the role of kind of the glue that holds the team together. Not in the emotional sense, but like he's the reason that they started this whole stuff in the first place. Stan is a kid with clinical anxiety who also probably has an undiagnosed neurodivergency. Basically, social situations in everyday life are just absolute torture for him, and at home isn't much better because his dad's an alcoholic and his mom doesn't know what to do about that. And one of his only escapes from this really sad and shitty reality is that he loves spooky shit. He loves absolutely all the weird stuff that ever happens in South Park. He's all over it. He's been chasing ghosts since the time he could walk. Everyone else in their group is pretty protective of him. Next up we've got Kyle, who pretty neatly falls into the archetype of de facto unself-appointed leader. No one even really appointed him leader, actually. What kind of just happened is that the three of them were doing all the stupid things without caring for their self-preservation at all, and Kyle was the only one to go, hey, maybe we should try not to die. And thus accidentally made himself the babysitter of all of them. He's very salty about this. Kyle's already a pretty interesting character. He's smart, he's got a temper. All of that's pretty much the same. I've also just kind of mama-friend-ified him a bit. He's the guy that just keeps going, Kenny, get out of the tree, you're gonna fall out and snap your neck. Cartman, for fuck's sake, put the knife down, all they did was look at you funny. Stan, for fuck's sake, take your meds, you need them. No, we're not going to. Why would you want to steal the possessed scarecrow's head? He is the only reason that any of them are alive. But then again, it's also kind of a miniature miracle that he himself is alive, because he also does stupid shit. Moving on from character stuff, though, one of the things that I'm really excited about exploring in this story is that I'm giving all of these characters different supernatural powers, either things that happen to them or skills that they attain through study. Kyle is either the first or second one to start getting magical abilities, and this starts right at the first chapter of the story I'm writing. The whole plot of the first story is that they're going into a haunted library that was said to be owned by a witch, and they're looking for paranormal artifacts to help them in their paranormal fuckery, because Kyle's been getting really worried lately that if they keep going the way they are without any magical backup, that one of them's gonna get hurt and die. And at the end of that chapter, he ends up obtaining a spell book that was left behind by the witch. From there, he basically teaches himself magic with a little bit of help from the ghost of the witch that still lives in the library. And he basically becomes their go-to mage, doing all the cool stuff like figuring out all these ancient spells and learning how to do exorcisms and all that kind of shit. And in the same chapter, Stan finds a magical sword. I decided on a sword because in the D&D episodes, they give Stan a sword. So I'm imagining it's kind of like this multi-use thing that if he slashes the air right, it can create a shield. I kind of wanted to make him the group's protector, because in every other situation, the group is protecting him. I also really like the idea that Kyle just never really figures out destructive magic. Like, every now and then he can put out really big blasts of really powerful destructive magic, but in regular combat where he's not trying to blow shit up, he's useless. That's okay though, because he can always win in just a fist fight. Kenny was very fun to think about because he's already such a weird-ass character who was obviously magic in the original stuff. In this one, I'm making him a little more mysterious. For starters, he doesn't die nearly as much as he does in the original series. I think in like the first season or so, he literally died every single episode. In this story, he doesn't start dying until like the end of the very first season. And that's because the start of the second season is all about the whole fiasco of, oh my god, Kenny died, oh my god, now he's inside Cartman's body, oh my god, where is he now? And then he comes back at the end of the thing, and everyone just forgets about it. That's probably its whole own video. For starters, Kenny is a weird-ass kid. Like, the big, wide stare, the unnerving grin. Pretty much everyone keeps a wide berth from him except for his friends who think that he's the best. They're probably more protective of Kenny than they are of Stan, even. And can you blame him? I mean, look at that guy. He's just the best. I'm actually really excited to write about that second season plot, because after that whole thing when he comes back, it's revealed that he's actually been dying relatively frequently ever since they started hunting all this supernatural stuff. It's just that no one noticed before. And obviously Kenny's magical powers and stuff are that he can come back to life, that he's immortal. But I'm thinking of giving him some more ghostly powers that come when he starts being able to do this thing called soul manipulation. It basically means that he ends up getting such good control over his soul from being a ghost so often that he can literally manipulate his soul to the point where he can just choose to die right then and there. Like, Ghost just flies out of his body and now he can go and be a ghost and do stuff like move small objects and all that shit. And then when he's done, because his body wasn't damaged, he can just go back in and it's like it never happened. He can even start to do it with his soul still partially inside his body, where his arm goes numb or his legs go numb and he can start using some of his ghostly powers. I've also decided that he has this weird healing factor that he gains control over. Basically the same thing that kept healing and fixing his body up every time he died. He ends up gaining the ability to control that a little bit and gets really good regenerative abilities, as well as eventually learning how to heal his friends. Besides all that, I haven't fully decided why Kenny is immortal. In the original, it's because his dumbass parents were fucking around with the Cthulhu cult and shit. That sounds like a cool idea too, but I also like the ability that his soul is just, like, naturally special somehow. Like, maybe he has the soul of, like, this really ancient and really powerful wizard. And obviously he reincarnated, but since he was born in South Park, which is basically a beacon for all magical bullshit, he retained some of those old abilities. I think that's a cool idea too, because maybe the witch that owns the library also knew him in another life. And now, the asshole you've all been waiting for. I have a strange relationship with the original Cartman. And it's a very strange relationship because it basically goes like this. Cartman is my favorite character, but I hate him. I hate the things he does, I hate how evil he is. Okay, I kind of love how evil he is in certain scenarios, but still. So Cartman is what I would say the most subtly changed. He's very detailedly changed, but it's subtle at the same time. I don't know what I'm saying. Basically, I've just kept his antagonistic attitude, and I think I've pretty much scrapped everything else. He's the most obviously asshole out of all of them, but also strangely kind of like the nicest. I've basically just changed him so that instead of only getting mad when he himself is insulted, he gets mad when anyone is insulted in a way that he deems is not okay. For example, he has absolutely no problem calling his friends horrible nicknames, but that's only because they've expressed to him that they're okay with that. If anyone else were to call them those nicknames, and they stated or even alluded to the fact that they were uncomfortable with that, Cartman promptly sends them to the ICU faster they can say, "What you gonna do about it, fat ass?" Before Stan gets his sword, he was pretty much the resident muscle guy. Cartman whines a lot, but it's actually pretty hard to hurt him. And he's pretty strong due to being big and on the rugby team. So he was the one body slamming mutants and shit before they found the whole magic stuff. Which is interesting because his main set of powers actually doesn't have anything to do with physical combat. The first powers he gets happens after Kenny possesses him. This power being both a soul link with Kenny himself, so things like this involve like a danger sense, sometimes being able to see out of his eyes, sometimes them being able to share psychic messages. But before he figures that out, he realizes that he can now see ghosts. Which is interesting because Kenny himself can't see ghosts. Kenny chalks it up to Cartman having had his soul so close to a dead soul that he's now more aware of souls. Cartman doesn't really care though, he just goes around and promptly makes friends or enemies with all the ghosts in the area. Which is hilarious because Cartman is the last person that you want playing mediator when you're trying to convince a ghost to stop haunting people. I do imagine he also gets those same electricity powers at some point, but I haven't quite decided how that happens. But I do want to dip back into the whole Kenny dead thing. Like I've said before that one incident, no one remembers that Kenny dies. Which is the reason I don't show it, because no one remembers. But after that point on, Cartman remembers. And that gets interesting because it doesn't take long for Kenny to find out. And thus begins a lot of the angst. Because Kenny now feels guilty whenever he dies, and Cartman is left behind to deal with the damage control, knowing full well that no one's going to remember the next day. Not only that, but there was a lot of drama that happened when he was possessed by Kenny. The really abridged version of it is that when someone is possessed by something for a very long time, the stress on a body from having to carry more than one soul basically causes it to start to shut down. And Cartman held out for a lot longer than anyone thought he would, but once he started losing a lot of weight, started to go into organ failure, all that shit, Stan and Kyle couldn't delay it any longer, and they knew they had to exorcise Kenny from him, even if they knew that it might mean that Kenny could never come back. Cartman, on the other hand, even though he was literally dying, went, "Fuck no, stay away from me with that exorcism shit, we're not doing this until we are sure that we can get Kenny back." They ended up having to forcefully exorcise him, and it wasn't pretty for their relationship afterwards. They eventually made up, but there was a portion between those two events where Cartman wasn't talking to Stan or Kyle. And it sucked because the stress on his body wasn't quite over yet and he was still doing pretty bad health-wise. Needless to say, they made it up before Kenny came back, but that brought on a whole new problem because Cartman didn't know what to do about the fact that he was the only one that remembered all of that misery. I think from this video you can tell which character is my favorite, but whatever. Oh yeah, also I gave him glasses. He usually wears contacts because glasses are for nerds, but, you know. So there you have it. There's my South Park reboot. I don't have much else planned or drawn for this aside from like a few sketches and the preliminary work of like a first chapter kind of thing. I could do a reading of that if anyone's interested. And even if you're not, I might even just show it to you anyways, because who even cares? This is just what I want to do. But yeah, there you have it.